"There's a wild beast in your woods," said the artist Cunningham, as he was being driven to the station. It was the only remark he had made during the drive, but as Vincill had talked incessantly, his companion's silence had not been noticeable. "A stray fox or two, and some resident weasels. Nothing more formidable," said Vincill. The artist said nothing. "What did you mean about a wild beast?" said Vincill later, when they were on the platform. "Oh, nothing. My imagination here is the train," said Cunningham. That afternoon, Vincill went for one of his frequent rambles through his woodland property. He had stuffed Britain in his study and knew the names of quite a number of wildflowers, so his aunt had possibly some justification in describing him as a great naturalist. At any rate, he was a great walker. It was his custom to take mental notes of everything he saw during his walks, not so much for the purpose of assisting contemporary science as to provide topics for conversations afterwards. When the bluebells began to show themselves in flower, he made a point of informing everyone of the fact. The season of the year might have warned his hearers of the likelihood of such an occurrence, but at least they felt that he was being absolutely frank with them. What Vincill saw on this particular afternoon was, however, something far removed from his ordinary range of experience. On a shelf of smooth stone overhanging a deep pool in the hollow of an oak coppice, a boy of about 16 lay asprawl, drying his wet brown limbs luxuriously in the sun. His wet hair, parted by a recent dive, lay close to his head, and his light brown eyes, so light that there was almost tigerish gleam in them, were turned towards Vincill with a certain lazy watchfulness. It was an unexpected apparition, and Vincill found himself engaged in the novel process of thinking before he spoke. Where on earth could this wild-looking boy hail from? The miller's wife had lost a child some 2 months ago, supposed to have been swept away by the mill race. But that had been a mere baby, not a half-grown lad. "What are you doing there?" he demanded. "Obviously sunning myself," replied the boy. "Where do you live?" "Here, in these woods." "You can't live in the woods," said Vincill. "They are very nice woods," said the boy, with a touch of patronage in his voice. "But where do you sleep at night?" "I don't sleep at night. That's my busiest time." Vincill began to have an irritated feeling that he was grappling with a problem that was eluding him. "What do you feed on?" he asked. "Flesh," said the boy, and he pronounced the word with slow relish, as though he were tasting it. "Flesh? What flesh?" "Since it interests you. Rabbits, wildfowl, hares, poultry, lambs in their season, children, when I can get any. They're usually too well locked in at night, when I do most of my hunting. It's quite 2 months ago since I tasted child flesh." Ignoring the chaffing nature of the last remark, Vincill tried to draw the boy on the subject of possible poaching operations. You're talking rather through your hat when you speak of feeding on hares. Considering the nature of the boy's toilet, the simile was hardly an apt one. Our hillside hares aren't easily caught. At night, I hunt on 4 feet, was the somewhat cryptic response. I suppose you mean that you hunt with a dog, hazarded Ventil. The boy rolled slowly over onto his back and laughed a weird, low laugh that was pleasantly like a chuckle and disagreeably like a snarl. I don't fancy any dog would be very anxious for my company, especially at night. Ventil began to feel that there was something positively uncanny about the strange-eyed, strange-tongued youngster. I can't have you staying in these woods, he declared authoritatively. I fancy you'd rather have me here than in your house, said that boy. The prospect of this wild, nude animal in Ventil's primly ordered house was certainly an alarming one. If you don't go, I shall have to make you, said Ventil. The boy turned like a flash, plunged into the pool, and in a moment had flung his wet and glistening body halfway up the bank where Ventil was standing. In an otter, the movement would have been very remarkable. In a boy, Ventil found it sufficiently startling. His foot slipped as he made an involuntary backward movement, and he found himself almost prostrate on the slippery weed-grown bank, with those tigerish yellow eyes not very far from his own. Almost instinctively, he half raised his hand to his throat. The boy laughed again, a laugh in which the snarl had nearly driven out the chuckle, and then, with another of his astonishing lightning movements, plunged out of view into a yielding tangle of weed and fern. What an extraordinary wild animal, said Ventil as he picked himself up. And then he recalled Cunningham's remark, "There's a wild beast in your woods." Walking slowly homeward, Ventil began to turn over in his mind various local occurrences which might be traceable to the existence of this astonishing young savage. Something had been thinning the game in the woods lately. Poultry had been missing from the farms. Hares were growing unaccountably scarcer, and complaints had reached him of lambs being carried off bodily from the hills. Was it possible that this wild boy was really hunting the countryside in company with some clever poacher dog? He had spoken of hunting 4-footed by night, but then again, he had hinted strangely at no dog caring to come near him, especially at night. It was certainly puzzling. And then, as Ventil ran his mind over the various depredations that had been committed during the last month or two, he came suddenly to a dead stop, unlike in his walk and his speculations. The child missing from the mill 2 months ago, the accepted theory was that it had tumbled into the mill race and had been swept away. But the mother had always declared she had heard a shriek on the hillside of the house, in the opposite direction from the water. It was unthinkable, of course, but he wished that the boy had not made that uncanny remark about child flesh eaten 2 months ago. Such dreadful things should not be said even in fun. Ventil, contrary to his usual wont, did not feel disposed to be communicative about his discovery in the wood. His position as a parish councillor and justice of the peace seemed somehow compromised by the fact that he was harboring a personality of such dreadful repute on his property. There was even a possibility that a heavy bill of damages for raided lambs and poultry might be laid at his door. At dinner that night, he was quite unusually silent. "Where's your voice going to?" said his aunt. "One would think you had seen a wolf." Venchil, who was not familiar with the old saying, thought the remark to be rather foolish. If he had seen a wolf on his property, his tongue would have been extraordinarily busy with the subject. At breakfast next morning, Venchil was conscious that his feeling of uneasiness regarding yesterday's episode had not wholly disappeared, and he resolved to go by train to the neighboring cathedral town, hunt up Cunningham, and learn from him what he had really seen that had prompted the remark about a wild beast in the woods. With this resolution taken, his usual cheerfulness partially returned, and he hummed a bright little melody as he sauntered to the morning room for his customary cigarette. As he entered the room, the melody made way abruptly for a pious invocation. Gracefully asprawl on the ottoman, in an attitude of almost exaggerated repose, was the boy of the woods. He was drier than when Venchil had last seen him, but no other alteration was noticeable in his toilet. "How dare you come here?" asked Venchil furiously. "You told me I was not to stay in the woods," said the boy calmly. "But not to come here. Supposing my aunt should see you." And with a view to minimizing that catastrophe, Venchil hastily obscured as much of his unwelcome guest as possible under the folds of a Morning Post. At that moment, his aunt entered the room. This is a poor boy who lost his way and lost his memory. He doesn't know who he is or where he comes from," explained Venchil desperately, glancing apprehensively at the waif's face to see whether he was going to add inconvenient candor to his other savage propensities. Miss Venchil was enormously interested. Perhaps his underlinen is marked," she suggested. "He seems to have lost most of that too," said Venchil, making frantic little grabs at the Morning Post to keep it in its place. A naked homeless child appealed to Miss Venchil as warmly as a stray kitten or a derelict puppy would have done. "We must do all we can for him," she decided. In a very short time, a messenger, dispatched to the rectory, where a page boy was kept, had returned with a suit of pantry clothes and the necessary accessories of shirt, shoes, collar, etc. Clothed, clean, and groomed, the boy lost known of his uncanniness in Venchil's eyes, but his aunt found him sweet. "We must call him something till we know who he really is," she said. How about Gabriel Ernest, I think. Those are very nice, suitable names." Venchil agreed, but he privately doubted whether they were being grafted onto a nice, suitable child. His misgivings were not diminished by the fact that his staid and elderly spaniel had bolted out of the house at the first incoming of the boy, and now obstinately remained shivering and yapping at the further end of the orchard, while the canary, usually as vocally industrious as Venchil himself, had put itself on an allowance of frightened cheeps. More than ever, he was resolved to consult Cunningham without loss of time. As he drove off to the station, his aunt was arranging that Gabriel Ernest should help her to entertain the infant members of her Sunday school class at tea that afternoon. Cunningham was not at first disposed to be communicative. "My mother died of some brain trouble," he explained. "So you will understand why I am adverse to dwelling on anything of an impossibly fantastic nature that I may see or think I have seen." "But what did you see?" persisted Van Chill. "What I thought I saw was something so extraordinary that no really sane man could dignify it with the credit of having actually happened. I was standing the last evening I was with you, half hidden in the hedge grove by the orchard gate, watching the dying glow of the sunset. Suddenly, I became aware of a naked boy, a bather from some neighboring pool. I took him to be, who was standing out on the bare hillside, also watching the sunset. His pose was so suggestive of some wild faun of pagan myth that I instantly wanted to engage him as a model, and in another moment, I think I should have hailed him. But just then, the sun dipped out of view, and all the orange and pink slid out of the landscape, leaving it cold and gray. At the same moment, an astounding thing happened. The boy vanished too. "What? Vanished? Away into nothing?" asked Van Chill excitedly. "No. That is the dreadful part of it," answered the artist. On the open hillside where the boy had been standing a second ago stood a large wolf, blackish in color, with gleaming fangs and cruel yellow eyes. You may think. But Van Chill did not stop for anything as futile as thought. Already he was tearing at top speed towards the station. He dismissed the idea of a telegram. "Gabriel Ernest is a werewolf," was hopelessly inadequate effort at conveying the situation, and his aunt would think it was code message to which he had omitted to give her the key. His one hope was that he might reach home before sundown. The cab which he chartered at the other end of the railway journey bore him with what seemed exasperating slowness along the country roads, which were pink and mauve with flush of the sinking sun. His aunt was putting away some unfinished jams and cake when he arrived. "Where's Gabriel Ernest?" he almost screamed. "He's taking the little tube child home," said his aunt. "It was getting so late, I thought it wasn't safe to let it go back alone. What a lovely sunset, isn't it?" But Van Chill, although not oblivious of the glow in the western sky, did not stay to discuss its beauties. At a speed for which he was scarcely geared, he raced along the narrow lane that led to the home of the Tubes. On one side ran the swift current of the mill stream. On the other rose the stretch of bare hillside. A dwindling rim of red sun showed still on the skyline, and the next turning must bring him in view of the ill-assorted couple he was pursuing. Then the color went suddenly out of things, and a gray light settled itself with a quick shiver over the landscape. Van Chill heard a shrill wail of fear and stopped running. Nothing was ever seen again of the tube child or Gabriel Ernest. but the latter's discarded garments were found lying in the road. So it was assumed that the child had fallen into the water, and that the boy had stripped and jumped in vain, in endeavor to save it. Venchiel and some workmen who were nearby at the time testified to having heard a child scream loudly just near the spot where the clothes were found. Miss Toop, who had 11 other children, was decently resigned to her bereavement, but Miss Venchiel sincerely mourned her lost foundling. It was on her initiative that a memorial brass was put up in the parish church to Gabriel Ernest, an unknown boy who bravely sacrificed his life for another. Venchiel gave away to his aunt in most things, but he flatly refused to subscribe to the Gabriel Ernest Memorial.